Grady MP.
Thank you, Dame Meg. Governor, since we last spoke of this committee, the global trading system has become somewhat unpredictable, from Liberation Day to arguments this weekend about the exports of critical minerals and rare earths from China. There are real concerns about President Trump's big, beautiful bill and warnings that the US bond market could crack, with the Treasury Secretary of the US reassuring investors, it seems, that the US won't default on its debt. So where does this lead the global trading system and the global economy more widely?
It leaves us with, of course, a lot more uncertainty and unpredictability about it. I mean, just to illustrate that, there are really, I sort of boil this down into two judgments that we have to make. I mean, what are the policies going to be, and what's the impact of those policies? And obviously, on the first one, what are the policies going to be? I mean, the challenge we have to do is that whenever we take our decisions, we have to stop the music at some point and say, well, where are we? And that was very difficult. And of course, indeed, if you now, 3 weeks or so since we took that decision, as you were just saying, the world, we've had a lot more has come out in that period, going both ways in terms of where this may be. And as Catherine was saying, this is having a big impact on markets. Markets have moved quite a bit since we had this had our last meeting. I think it's more, in some ways, more important to focus on the second point, which is what's the impact of all of this. And I think at the moment my judgment would be as follows. I think the impact of fragmenting the world trading system is negative for world growth and world activity. I think it obviously increases uncertainty, and this is very well established in sort of economics, but you hear it now when you go around the country from businesses. One impact of that is that it tends to cause delays and putting off of investment decisions, because an investment decision is typically a once only irreversible decision. And so if you're offered the chance in that context to say, should I take it now or should I wait, the appeal of waiting goes up, frankly. As we've, I think, said before, I mean, the impact on prices is much more ambiguous, actually, and this is the real area for me of question. I think the first interpretations are really that it's lower activity, lower world activity, which will lower world export prices, which will lower inflation. That's quite open to question, though. I was interested this morning, the OECD have come out with their new projections, and they've actually somewhat gone the other way and said, yes, it's lower for activity, but it's not necessarily lower for inflation. And the reason for that is, and we tried to bring this out in our scenarios, is that if it affects the supply side of the world economy, so if it starts disrupting supply chains, for instance, that could have the opposite effect, that it could actually, it could start disrupting markets, supply chains and markets again, and that could actually put some upward force into pressure into inflation. Now, at the moment, it's really, frankly, too soon to tell. We're not seeing the sort of effects on supply chains that we were seeing sort of back in 2021, for instance. But it is a genuine concern because, I think the best example of this is the US-China. I mean, I think US-China is the centre of this whole thing, really. And the question of where that's going and what effect that's having on supply is obviously a very important question. So we're going to have to keep watching this very carefully, I'm afraid.
Well, question. I mean, we've heard various diverse views about how monetary policy should move forward. Does all this uncertainty lead to a serious risk that, despite the bank's best endeavours, monetary policy could go badly wrong, with inflation undershooting or overshooting the target?
Well, let me say two things on that. Start with more of the sort of the theory part, and then come on to the sort of practice. There's a huge amount of debate, obviously, about how you respond to uncertainty. I mean, one school of thought is that it causes you to act more cautiously, and that's because you sort of, in a sense, you want to wait to see how it develops. That's not an unreasonable view, and one that I certainly, put some weight on. But it is not a reasonable view if you think that there is a threat to the integrity of the anchor, which is the inflation target, clearly. In that case, the answer, I think, is that you should act more aggressively, more. Catherine might use the word activistly. I don't know, as an activist. Now, I'm not seeing that at the moment, but I think it's important. That's an important thing that we have to sort of keep in our mind as we make these judgments, that it isn't always the case that you respond to uncertainty by being more cautious. Now, that's the first part. In terms of the second part, how you sort of play that out into the decisions, and you made the point, could you go badly wrong? And that was a very big question for me in this decision we took 3 weeks ago. And this is really where the scenarios came in, because we painted two scenarios. One was, frankly, weaker demand, could be domestic, could be international. The other was the supply side, could be domestic, could be international. And the question for me was, these scenarios helped me to answer the question which your question really goes to, which is how badly wrong could you be as a guide? And I think the point I took from the scenarios was, you could be wrong, but you're not going to be so badly wrong that you're losing control at that point. And that gave me greater confidence to use what I might call the more careful and gradualist, continue to use the more careful and gradualist approach and do the 25.